What's up? Welcome to Epic. In our last video, we talked about where James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives to all freely and ungrudgingly, and he will give it to him. But we talked about this concept of asking in faith, and we talked about the fact that that applies not only to asking God for wisdom, but it also applies to asking God for other things as well. If we're going to go to God in prayer, we need to have faith that he is going to hear that prayer and that he is going to answer that prayer. James tells us that the person that asks without having faith, the person who is doubting as they pray, is like the surging sea driven and tossed by the wind, and that person should expect to receive nothing from God, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. And so we talked about this concept of asking in faith. And I think that's very important for us as we go through life as believers, as people who are hopefully praying to God, that we be praying in faith. And so today we're going to continue right on in the book of James, and we are going to look at the next section. And this is talking about people in different types of positions in life, different types of financial situations in which someone may have a lot more and someone may have a lot less. And so let's listen to what James has to say in James chapter 1, starting in verse 9. He says, "Let the brother of humble circumstances boast in his exaltation, but let the rich boast in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a flower of the field. For the sun rises, and together with the scorching wind dries up the grass, its flower falls off, and its beautiful appearance perishes. In the same way, the rich person will wither away while pursuing his activities." All right, and so James starts off this paragraph and he talks about people in two different positions. You have the brother of humble circumstances and you have the rich. And so the brother of humble circumstances, that is the person who doesn't have as much. That is the person who's more on the poor side of things, the person who maybe doesn't have a ton of material possessions, the person who doesn't have a lot of extra things. Maybe he's the person that is in need constantly, who maybe doesn't know where their next meal is going to come from, doesn't know how they're going to make their house payment, that doesn't have a whole lot of stuff. James starts off and he addresses that person. And he says, let the brother of humble circumstances boast in his exaltation. So the person who doesn't have a whole lot, maybe the person who is considered to be like a nobody, James says, let that person boast in their exaltation. And so when that person is in their normal situation of life and maybe something comes their way where they have a season where they have a little bit more abundance than they normally have, they're blessed maybe extra financially, or maybe they're blessed extra materially, or maybe they get a little bit of recognition that they don't normally get. Maybe they get a promotion at work. James says, boast in your exaltation in that circumstance. And the reason that they can boast in those circumstances is because what James is going to say later in the chapter, starting in verse 16, he says, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." All right, and so what James is saying here is that the person, the brother of humble circumstances, the poor person, the person who doesn't have a whole lot, can boast when they have a season of life in which they receive a little bit more, in which they have a little bit more, because that is a blessing from the Lord. That is something that they should rejoice in, that they should praise God for, and that they should enjoy that season knowing that this is not the situation that they normally find themselves in. But then James addresses the rich. And he says, but let the rich boast in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a flower of the field. All right, and so this sounds strange. He said the poor person is supposed to get excited when they get a little bit of extra, when they get a little bit of recognition. But he says the rich should boast in their humiliation. In seasons of life where maybe they find themselves in need where they normally don't, or maybe a season in life in which they're not the person that's the center of attention, or they're not the most important person around, or maybe they don't have enough to make ends meet all of a sudden. He says that they should boast in that. Why? And then he says something like, because they will pass away like the flower of the field. And then he elaborates further and he says, for the sun rises, and together with the scorching wind dries up the grass, and its flower falls off, and its beautiful appearance perishes. In the same way, the rich person will wither away while pursuing his activities. And so what James is saying here is that the rich person should boast in their humiliation, the times in which they find themselves in a little bit more need than normal, the times in which they find themselves maybe without something that they need. They should rejoice in that because it's those moments in life that keep them reliant on God and not on their wealth. You see, the tendency when we have all that we need to make it through life is to begin to rely on that stuff. When we have all the money we need to pay all of our bills and to supply all of our needs and our wants, we have a tendency to rely on our money. We have a tendency to lean on it and a tendency to stop leaning on God. And so God allows things to come into our life to humble us, to bring us down a couple of notches and make sure we stay dependent on Him. So you may be in a season of life in which you have a lot of stuff. Don't be surprised when a situation comes your way and you find yourself in a season of need or a season of scarcity where you don't have all that you need or where you barely have enough for what you need and you can't maybe supply all of your wants like you normally would. James says that's a good thing. You should rejoice in that. You should thank God for a humbling time such as that because it keeps you relying on Him. It keeps you leaning on Him. If you are a person with a lot of stuff, and you are constantly pursuing more and more and more stuff, and that becomes your primary motivation, you're going to waste your life away. And what James has pointed out here is that the person that's constantly chasing after material goods, the person who's constantly chasing after wealth, is going to wither away. Just like flowers of the field. As Jesus pointed out in His Sermon on the Mount, God dresses them beautifully, and yet they're burnt up. They don't last long. Their appearance, their beauty, it perishes. And in the same way, the rich person's possessions are not forever. Sure, you may buy a nice pair of shoes. Sure, you may buy a nice purse. But that stuff doesn't last forever. You may buy a nice car. It's only going to last you a few years. You know, the thing about it is, possessions are very temporary. Even if something lasts you a lifetime, that's nothing when compared to eternity. Jesus actually taught a very similar principle to this in the Sermon on the Mount. And He says this in Matthew chapter 6, starting at verse 19, He says, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So, whatever motivates you in this life, whatever causes you to be driven, if it's your possessions, that's going to be where your heart is. If that's what your treasure is, that's your prize, all of your worldly possessions, that's going to be where your heart is. That's going to be what motivates you. And ultimately, you're going to end up worshiping that. You're going to end up looking to that more than you look at God. And that becomes idolatry in your life. But if you're storing up for yourself treasures in eternity, if you're storing up for yourself heavenly goods, meaning you're working for the Lord, looking forward to your heavenly rewards, and you know what? God blesses you with a little bit extra in this life, that's fine. It's not a sin to be rich. It's not wrong to be rich. The problem is when our main motivation in life is chasing after those things. All right, and so I think this is a great reminder from James today. Don't chase after worldly goods. Don't make this world's stuff what you're all about. Chase after God. Focus on God. Focus on what He has for you and what His design and command for your life is. Pursue that and praise God as He blesses you along the way. And if you have a lot of stuff, if you have a lot of status, if you have a lot of things and money, praise God for that. Count your blessings on the daily. But when you find yourself in a season of life in which you're in a little bit more need, rejoice in that time as well. Thank God that He keeps you humble. Thank God that He reminds you that your possessions can't take care of you, that they can't sustain you, that they can't satisfy you, and ultimately that He is the one that does all of those things for you. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching today. If you liked this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, tell me who you are, where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe. I'm going to continue posting these videos as we continue to go through the book of James. Also, drop some comments with some ideas for some other things you'd like to see on this channel. I'd love to give you guys exactly what you're looking for in a new Christian YouTube channel. So, thank you guys for watching. Bye.